You're listening to the Bear in Mind podcast, episode number 44.
A podcast uncovering identity, color, and love, where driving yourself crazy is totally sane and curable. Now your host, T. Vias.
When I think of identity crisis, I usually think of the kind of stereotypical identity crisis that you see in a lot of Western films where it's called the midlife crisis. So it's essentially an identity crisis, and it's related to something like where a man is married, he has children, and somewhere in his 40s, he all of a sudden wants to buy a sports car and reevaluates his whole life and everything like that. And that's kind of the cliche and what we see in a lot of films. And I'm going to talk about identity crisis in relation to when our circumstances change. So an example of this is, let's say you've been married or in a long-term relationship, and then all of a sudden the relationship ends for whatever reason, and you are single, and now your circumstance has changed. And that is, in and of itself, brings about kind of an evaluation of who you are or who you want to be. That kind of your identity is at a moment in time where you start to reevaluate it because a circumstance in your life has changed. Either you wanted it to change or you didn't want it to change. And you've come to kind of this point where you're like, where do I want to go, or who am I? And I'm actually going to reference what happens with our identity when our circumstances do change, and it's something that we wanted it to change, and we were trying to achieve something where our circumstances change, and we achieved a goal, and now the circumstance is different. But first, I wanted to talk about what identity is, and I've touched a little bit on this in earlier episodes. And identity is basically the thoughts that you have about yourself. It is that simple, because we try to then create identities through definitions. But at the end, a definition of, let's say somebody is, what does it mean to be European or something like that, or identify with a nationality from a certain nation. That is just open to interpretation. And how you view yourself in relation to some of those definitions, you can choose to take on some of those definitions or not. And essentially, when you strip out all of that kind of, what I would say, fog, or cut through kind of what other people say in definitions and opinions, it essentially is what you think about yourself. And most of us don't even know what we think about ourselves. We're not really conscious of it. We're not aware of the thoughts running in our head about ourselves. We don't sit back and look at it. And sometimes what ends up happening is the identity crisis comes at a moment where there's something that happens, and it forces us all of a sudden to think about ourselves maybe in a new way. And this usually happens when you are trying to achieve the goal and you actually achieve the goal. And it doesn't have to be anything big. It can be something like, well, you're losing weight, so you want to lose like 10 kilos or something, and you lose it. And that kind of creates an identity crisis a little bit. It kind of uproots kind of what you think about yourself. And a lot of times when people do lose weight and they achieve their goal weight, they go back to their original weight. They'll put the weight back on because it is sometimes a little difficult to handle that identity as a person that weighs this number of kilos as opposed to what they had been used to, what had been so familiar. And I have an example of even something smaller of achieving a goal. I'm in a class right now, and it's a very intensive class, and we actually have oral exams. And they're very intense, and this is something I really want. in this class, at the end of this class, I want to be able to make a career change. So it is something I 100% want, and I'm totally enjoying it. And it came to a point where we had the oral exam, and all of my class members, they didn't pass the first time they did the oral exam. And then I did the oral exam for my first time, and I passed. And it was very, very uncomfortable. Here I am achieving something, working towards this ultimate goal that I want at the end of the class. And this was the step. You need to pass a certain number of exams in order to pass the class. And so it really did a number on me. I am not the type of person that just kind of goes out there and says, no, I'm going to do this no matter what. And I'd been kind of working on this. And then when I finally achieved kind of that first step towards the ultimate goal that I want, it didn't feel good. It wasn't like, yes, I passed. This is so amazing. And here's why. It's because I had a hard time with kind of viewing myself and thinking about myself as this person that is going to show up 100% in my class. And I decided that ahead of time. I said, okay, I want to make a career change. Again, so if some of you have been listening to this will be my 4th career change. And I don't foresee that I will have other career changes because I am genuinely loving what I'm learning, even through the tough moments. And I decided that I've done different types of educational things throughout my life, and I realized that I never went like all in, that expression where you go in 100%, I'm there, I'm going to show up, I'm going to be present in the class, I'm going to do the assignments, and I'm going to push through all of the uncomfortableness, all the newness. You don't really know something, and you have to do this, and you have to present in front of people. You have to do a whole bunch of stuff that is just really uncomfortable. And I said, no, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to forget the fear. I know it's going to be there. I'm going to have mind drama over it, and I'm just going to go. And that's not generally who I am. I guess even just saying that feels really uncomfortable. Like before, I wasn't this person that did that behaved this way in a class. I would kind of be always, I wanted to be invisible. I wanted no one to notice me. I just wanted to get through and pass. That was the kind of student I was. I'm like, okay, I never wanted to really, I didn't want the teacher to notice me, but then I didn't want the teacher to get mad at me and give me horrible feedback. So I just kind of wanted to be in this middle of the road. But at the end, it wasn't something that I felt like, hey, I got everything out of this class, or I learned so much, or I enjoyed it. And I decided I wanted to have fun, and I just wanted to go in and just go like all in. It's a weird expression, but I never really kind of understood it until someone said it to me. Or I'm just going to show up, do the work, and do it to the best of my ability, and be uncomfortable with any of the assignments that come at me. And it got me that first step in that class, doing that in a class. I can see that I'm going to achieve this goal. I'm believing that I can achieve this goal. And with that, I felt still very uncomfortable. And to me, that was like the first feeling of that identity crisis. Like this isn't really me. This is not you. This feels really uncomfortable. And I found myself like, oh, maybe I just need to be a little more quiet in class. Maybe I don't need to always, raise my hand to do something, or I just need to hold back, because that really felt familiar. And it's kind of like the same thing with losing weight. Like it feels uncomfortable to all of a sudden have less weight on you. And the old weight still feels familiar. It still feels like this is who you are, because you're carrying all of those same thoughts that you had about you. Because all of our thoughts are, pre-programmed from our childhood, basically, and from society and what they tell us all throughout our developmental years. And then we just kind of take it on. It becomes a knee-jerk reaction, and then we don't even become aware of what we think of ourselves. And then so when something like this happens that kind of jolts us and makes us rethink our identity, then we realize then we start to become really uncomfortable because we were never really aware of what we thought about ourselves or what we thought our identity was before this identity shift. And so I had been somewhat aware of my identity before, and so that's why I was able to make the change going into this class. I said, okay, I am going to come from a place and think differently about myself and show up in the class differently. And so the jolt hasn't been as harsh, but it still was like a jolt, like, oh no, I found myself saying, I want to go back. And these are kind of the smaller identity crises I think that people actually go through when they're trying to achieve something and it feels really uncomfortable because all of a sudden it's like it becomes a requirement to rethink what you think about yourself now that you have achieved. So it could be a small step, it can be a big goal, it can be whatever, and it doesn't feel as amazing as we thought it would. That 10 kilos less doesn't feel as amazing. And it isn't actually supposed to be a difference. We think that there's going to be a difference. Like I thought I was going to feel amazing, and I did, and I was proud of myself. But at the same time, I had negative and positive feelings about the situation. And most of those negative feelings had to do with that kind of identity crisis. And I think that we tend to forget that it isn't actually our circumstances that are going to create how we feel. The losing weight isn't going to make us happier. Me making progress towards my goal isn't actually going to give me that feeling that I want to have, because at the very essence of it is it's because our identity is about our thoughts, and our thoughts actually create our feelings. So all of the thoughts that we have about ourselves are going to be there whether or not we achieve this goal. And that is really good news when it comes to identity crisis, because it isn't really what's happening kind of outside of us that is really going to create this feeling that we want. It is going to bring up stuff for us in a really reflective way. When we try to go and achieve goals, it's going to bring up all of our thoughts about us. It's going to have us face our fears and bring us to a higher level of awareness about ourselves, which is going to be amazing. But at the end of it, it is still going to be about the thoughts about us. How we think about us is ultimately going to create that positive or negative feeling. And for me, all an identity crisis then becomes is kind of this opportunity to see our thoughts about ourselves. Because when this crisis does happen, it's because old stuff, old programming in our head is getting pushed to the surface, pushed up into our awareness. Because it wouldn't be a crisis at all, or we wouldn't see it at all as a crisis, because if it had been buried, then there would be no need to be like, oh, wait a minute. I'm having a different thought about myself. I might be this person that actually accomplishes something. And you kind of want to go back to thinking I'm not this person that accomplishes things, because that's always been familiar. And so that crisis is really just that upbringing of those thoughts. And that's why it is always an amazing thing to learn something new and do something new in your life, not because you want that circumstance to change, but because you become aware of how you're thinking about yourself. And so I'm going to wrap it up here, and I'll check back with you next week.
Thanks for listening. Listen for a new episode next Tuesday by subscribing on your favorite podcast platform. Bye for now.